What are you reading right now? Who's your favourite author? What are you going to read tomorrow? And how are you going to read it? There's no doubt that people feel what they read can make a statement about who they are, and that others might judge you by your reading list in the same way that some people judge a book by its cover. And now we can add to that the way we read, as well as what we read. But books open minds, and the right book at the right moment can have a profound influence. How much power can reading have? When I was 10, I knew exactly what I was going to do when I grew up. I was going to run an elephant orphanage in Kenya. I remember discussing this in earnest at my secondary school interview. Now, it's not as implausible an ambition as it might sound for a kid from London, given that I grew up partly in Kenya and I wanted to be a vet. But more than this, I think, was another influence. The books I was reading at the time, my very favourite books that I returned to so often and knew large sections by heart, were called My Family and Other Animals, Mr. Galliano's Circus, and Elephant Adventure. Each of these featured elephants or other animals that were rescued, tamed, studied and loved by the child heroes of the stories. But as you see, I'm here in Dubai, not in Tsavo National Park, and rather than working with these magnificent creatures, I've been working with the books themselves. I discovered I preferred poetry to physics and Charles Dickens to chemistry, but that same influence, the power of books, the magic of the written word, led me down a very different path. And just for me, the future might take you in a very different place to where you expected. So instead of raising baby elephants, I've spent 20 years working with books and authors publishing fiction. Taking a new manuscript through to a finished book is an intricate and rewarding process. Every individual part, editing, design, marketing, writing the blurb, is an essential element in creating this product that is very familiar to us all, but is inspiring, entertaining, can be educational, can be very beautiful and often very personal. Many of you may never have thought about publishing as a career. A lot of people think that publishing books is just about reading them, and often I've wished it was. But in fact, there's a huge variety of different roles in the publishing industry, from the editorial and the marketing, but through to financial, sales, and legal. And I'm sure each of you would have the talent and potential to find a satisfying role within the industry, even if you've never yet stopped to consider where your most treasured books actually come from. But nothing stands still. Since I was first bewitched by these fictional elephants, even since I started my first job in publishing, the industry has changed, and parts of it have changed phenomenally or even disappeared. By the time you graduate and you're ready to join the workforce, what will the publishing industry, and more importantly, the books that they're publishing, actually look like? Well, the truth is, we don't really know. But in a creative and optimistic industry, this is a journey that is fascinating to be on. Looking beyond tomorrow in any business is tricky. Looking at the future of publishing, well, there are so many unknown unknowns that sometimes the only thing we can be certain of is change. If you look back 10 or 15 years, ebooks were a matter of science fiction. In fact, some people like to say that the author Douglas Adams actually invented the ebook when he created The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. But anyway, the arrival of proper functional ebooks and e-readers and the ability to download books immediately from the web is the first significant change in format in the book since Gutenberg and Caxton developed the printing presses more than 500 years ago. Of course, we have audiobooks, and they're great when you're stuck in traffic, but they haven't significantly changed our reading habits. However, in the last 8 years, the rise of digital publishing and ebooks and the ability to buy and read books in an entirely different way has changed the face of the industry. 10 years ago, ebook revenue, digital revenue was zero. Today, it makes up to a quarter of the overall market of books. So, does it matter? That's the next question. The way we read, whether we read on an ebook, on screen, or on print, is it important? Well, the importance of reading itself, that's not in question. Much of the modern and the future world will be inaccessible without good literacy, even though reading is going to have to compete with an ever-increasing variety of different entertainment sources as time goes by. And recent studies have shown, for example, that reading for pleasure has a greater impact on children's academic success than even their parents' education, and that children who read widely will do better in seemingly unrelated subjects such as maths and science. So let's assume we're going to continue to read. But in 10, 20, or 200 years, what will our books look like? Do you think that Caxton and Gutenberg could have imagined the phenomenal impact their inventions would have had on the whole world for centuries to come? Will the rise of ebooks have a similar impact? At the moment, print books seem to be remaining dominant. They're convenient, they're reliable, they're undeletable, and they're relatively good value for money. But ebooks, will they gradually increase? Will they take over the print market as subsequent generations grow up hooked into the net? There's widely differing opinion on print versus ebook, e-readers versus tablets, smartphones versus everything, and whether the way we read on these different devices, the way we take in knowledge, the way we appreciate the words on the page, change depending on the way that we're reading, whether we're reading digitally or in print. Imagine reading an ebook or a print book. If you're studying, you're researching. You can flick back and forwards in a print book, you can make notes in the margin. You can think about the way, if you're reading a print book, you can feel the progress of your reading as the pages turn, as the pages decrease, something you could call the kinesthetic aspect of reading. You don't really get that in an ebook, but you can search in a digital way. You can use search functions. You could think about the power of text memory. If you're reading a print book and you want to reread a particular paragraph, many people, myself included, can picture very, very clearly whether that paragraph you want to find was on the top right or the bottom left of the open page of the book. On an ebook, most of the pages look exactly the same, but the ability to change the text style and shape of an ebook can have enormous benefit to a wide variety of readers. An ebook allows you to carry an entire library around in one small device. This is obviously handy for holidays, but it can also have an impact educationally. There are parts of the world where access to textbooks is very difficult, but a set of preloaded and updatable e-readers with a wide variety of reading material, or even cheap mobile phones with a reading app, could change lives by exposing tomorrow's children to a much wider range of reading material in different languages. Then there's the permanence of the text. Some of the books that Caxton and Gutenberg printed in the 15th century still exist and can still be read today. It gives us a way to time travel back into our own past. How do we preserve books that we create digitally and that are only saved digitally in the ether? There's no hard copy. Hopefully this is all going to be managed, but technology just moves so fast. I have floppy disks, for example, with my university dissertations. I couldn't read them again now, even if I wanted to, because the technology has become obsolete. So, how do these changes in the way we read affect us? Well, our brains weren't originally built specifically for reading, but they have adapted to reading, and arguably, the way we read has adapted them. So, if the way that we read digital is different to the way we read print books, what changes could this have for us in the future? When I was a child, print and paper were the only options. I imagine you have grown up using computers in your school and home life, having those embedded into your experience. But your children, will they touch smartphones or tablets or whatever device it is that we're using then before they even see a book? These things are changing fast. At the moment, print remains the dominant medium for children's fiction. But is that because it works better, or because today's parents' memories of learning to read are all on print? How many of you have seen that video of a really frustrated baby trying to swipe onto the next page of a print magazine? And in 2 or 3 decades' time, what is she going to buy to encourage her children's love of reading and to make sure that they learn to read and are able to use that? Looking at what we have today is one way of trying to imagine what we might be using to read in the future. A lot of children like you now have smartphones, and you can read books on those. It's convenient. I hope it encourages you to read more and more often. That can only be a good thing. Recent experiments with digital glasses providing almost constant visual content haven't proved so successful yet, but the rise of smartwatches suggests that we're getting ever more comfortable with constant close contact of our tech to our bodies. If you think about how we download ebooks now, we can get a new ebook almost instantly from the internet as soon as we want it and download it to an e-reader or a tablet. Now, perhaps we'll be taking that technology a step or two further. If you could upload the information from a book directly to your brain, would you want to? This might be fantastic if you needed to learn Kung Fu or how to fly a helicopter in the next 5 minutes, or maybe for memorizing your Spanish vocab for tomorrow's test. But it cuts out the interaction with the written word, the visual interaction, the way that when you read a book, your imagination, your mind are creating so much of the world that the reader is intending to convey. So perhaps as information dissemination gets ever more personal, we'll start to choose how to access the different types of texts that we want to use. There's been a recent increase in print sales. Perhaps this suggests there's going to be a new market for a new kind of e-paper, something more lightweight and flexible. If you could have an ebook that more closely mirrored a print book with turnable pages that allowed you to bring in those kinesthetic aspects of reading I mentioned earlier, is that something you would want? The advantage being that when you got to the end, the press of a button, you could flood an entire new book through those same pages. Or perhaps our smartwatches will be able to project out full-size pages so that you could take your entire library with you on your wrist without having to squint at a tiny screen. Then there's the virtual reality headsets that are coming onto the market today. Is this a means by which people will choose to read? I don't know, but I can imagine that you could browse a virtual library, choosing books, flicking through them, using a virtual reality headset. It would be a much more pleasurable experience than looking at files and small pictures on an e-reader or a computer. And if we're talking about our tech getting ever smaller and ever more close contact with our bodies, how small, how close? Are we thinking contact lens size? So, children of tomorrow, what do you think? What answers are you going to have to these questions? One of the big challenges for each generation is to make sure that we find ways to preserve the best of our present and past cultures, along with the memories of our worst mistakes, so that we can preserve them, reflect on them, and pass them on into the future. For centuries, we've done this through books and through reading. What are you going to do? Your actions are going to change how we read in the future. As you grow up to become the scientists, the teachers, the authors, the publishers, maybe the elephant wranglers of tomorrow, what you do is going to shape the books that we read. And what I'm certain of is how we read in our future will depend on what you do with yours. Thank you.